This is a judgment call, okay? You know, you start asking somebody about something. I mean, well, we'll go through our little thing. You asked me about my age and I talked about something else. Okay, you have to make a decision as to whether to sort of slap me around a bit. No, you don't do that, generally. Or lead me back to say, well, that's very interesting, but the question I really was asking you was this. Or do you go with it a little bit and think, okay, yeah, I know, you know, he seems to be off on a tangent, but, you know, maybe this is interesting, you know. Maybe this, you know, I'm actually going to get, I didn't ask a question about this, but maybe I'm going to get some interesting material out of this. So what I recommend here is you have questions, or you have topics for questions, but be flexible about this because, there may be some very interesting stories that, you know, are not in response to your questions. And you've got to give the interviewee a little freedom to move here, freedom to work around and see where it goes. If it really is going off in some other direction, then steer it back. People generally find it easier to talk about concrete things rather than abstract things. So don't start by asking somebody, so philosophically, what is your world view on so and so? Ask them concrete things that they can remember, things that they can recall. Start with the simple and sort of move to the more difficult. As an interview goes on, you start to build a relationship. You start to build rapport with the person, and they will, half an hour in, they'll tell you things that they would not necessarily have told you right at the beginning. And again, go from the uncontroversial to the controversial. If you start the interview by saying, okay, well, I'd like to start talking about your recent conviction for tax evasion, okay, and your feelings about being sent to the federal penitentiary for the following 10 years. Yeah, this may be a very short interview, okay? Because now somebody may tell you later on, I'll give you the answer to that question, but I would not start with that, okay? We're not trying to do the in-your-face journalism stuff here, okay? The person's agreed to be interviewed. Start off a little bit more softly, and then work up to the tough stuff. Okay, a few other kind of tips here. You should be comfortable enough with whatever recording equipment you're using that you don't have to keep fiddling with it during the interview. Anytime your attention turns away from the person you're talking to and you're fiddling with the levels and looking at this and looking at that, the signal is, or the message is, this piece of technology is much more important than whatever I'm saying at the time. So be comfortable enough with what you've got. If you obviously got a problem with the equipment, you've got to sort of stop and deal with it. But don't try to keep your attention focused on the interviewee. Pay 100%, but mostly non-verbal attention. We have a terrible habit here of putting in I see, yeah, really, interesting, of punctuating, this is the conversation thing, and of punctuating other people's answers with a kind of reaffirmation there. And that is going to become, when you listen to a tape later, very, very irritating later on. Don't ask yes/no questions, because that's probably the answer you get. And try to be flexible. Ask questions as topics arise. Follow-up questions. Somebody asks you, somebody answers something, say, who? who did that, and when did that happen, and what was the circumstances, or how do you know that occurred, or how, what was your experience there? Sort of follow-up or probing questions are very, very helpful. Silences and pauses are okay. Okay, well, my question here is, let's say somebody finishes an answer to a question, and you sit there and you just look at them. Okay, what's going to happen?
I think this is over now.
I think this is over now.
Stop giving me sexy eyes.
All right. Keep talking, maybe, yeah. Okay, a couple of things happen. Firstly, there may be a moment of embarrassment, a little bit of awkwardness. We're in a culture where we don't like silence. And you've listened to conversations with people. People never wait for somebody to finish a thought. Oh, that reminds me of that, people are always jumping in and interrupting or following up very, very quickly. And we tend to back away from silence. It's a little awkward. So, if somebody finishes answering a question and you then don't say anything, you don't jump in with your next question, there may be a moment of embarrassment, and or, as you point out, they may think of something else to say. They may think of an example to illustrate the point. I'll give you a concrete example of this from a radio piece I produced a few years ago. And I didn't do the interview, a friend of mine did. He was interviewing the widow of a miner who was killed in a mine disaster in West Virginia. And, the interview had gone pretty well. It was 60 or 70 miners were killed in this mine accident. And she got to the end of an answer, and Michael just sat there and looked at her. By this time the interview had been going on for some time, and they were comfortable with each other. And she said, "Michael, I'd like to tell you about the last day I spent with my husband." And all he had to do was nod at that point. And she went on for about 5 minutes to take us this beautiful love story of the last day of her husband's life, the last day they spent together, and how she made his lunch, and how there'd been some rumours of gas in the mine, and she said she didn't want him to go, but he said, "I'm a miner and I've got a job to do." It was a beautiful story, a very sad story, a very moving story. And for me as the editor, it was a very easy job. I had all this other interview material. I just tidied up a couple of quotes, took the top and the bottom, and that was the story. It was a complete story there, and it was, and that would have not happened if he hadn't sort of sat there and just looked at her for a moment, because at this point she'd kind of been wanted to tell the story. They were at that point in their relationship, and his sitting there sort of kind of gave her permission to do this. This will certainly not happen all of the time, but sometimes you can get wonderful, wonderful stories by not jumping in with that next question, not pushing to the next point. Clarify technical terms, names, places, and objects. If somebody says, I used I don't know a technical, some industrial term. If you don't understand what it means, you can bet that your audience are not going to understand it. So